Good evening, I'm Driti Atri, and tonight on Skyline, America is changing fast. Jobs are disappearing, visa rules are tightening, AI is replacing workers. In fact, fraud crackdowns are intensifying, and every citizenship is no longer guaranteed in some cases. And tonight, we break down these stories into 8 major segments. In segment 1, we'll talk about Trump's proposed H-1B wage hike and why it could completely change the future for Indian tech workers. Along with that, the shocking H-1B fraud conspiracy involving 2 Indian origin men in California. In fact, the Indian origin billionaire who stunned students by paying off their loan. In the end, why Trinidad and Tobago's Prime Minister Kamala Prasad Basesa is going viral globally for saying, "I am a cool girl." So let's start with it. Well, for nearly 3 decades, the H-1B visa represented one of the most powerful symbols of middle-class ambition in India. Families invested lakhs, sometimes crores, into engineering college, coding boot camps, and American universities believing that there was a clear pathway ahead. Study hard, go into tech, move to America, build a better future. But now that entire equation, it may be changing. Ladies and gentlemen, the Trump administration has proposed increasing minimum H-1B salary requirement for nearly 30% across multiple wage levels. Now, officially, if we talk about, then Washington says this is about protecting American workers and updating salary benchmarks that were designed almost 20 years ago. But the deeper political message that's clear, America is becoming more selective about the kind of foreign workers it wants. Now, under that particular proposal, entry-level H-1B salaries could rise from about $73,000 to nearly $98,000 annually. Level 2 salaries could move beyond $123,000. In fact, in major cities like New York, some salary requirements would cross about $130,000. Now, imagine what this means for the employers. Now, for giant tech companies like Google or Microsoft, paying higher salaries, it may still be manageable. But for smaller startups and mid-sized consulting firms, sponsoring foreign workers could suddenly become extremely expensive. So that means companies may reduce the H-1B hiring dramatically, specifically for fresh graduates and junior engineers. And that is why Indians are watching this very nervously. Indians make up nearly 71% of H-1B recipients in America. No other nationality depends on this visa system at the same scale. It's just Indians. This is not just about immigration anymore. It is about the future of Indian global mobility itself. Now, for years, India's IT industry built enormous business models around the supplying skilled talent to the American market. Entire outsourcing ecosystem grew around this relationship, but now AI automation, rising political pressure, and visa restrictions are all colliding at the same time. Experts fear that younger Indian applicants may suffer the most here. Companies may increasingly hire only highly specialized workers in AI, cybersecurity, or advanced engineering whose expertise justifies the premium salary here. And politically, the atmosphere in America, it is changing too fast. Mr. Trump's support base has repeatedly argued that H-1B visas reduce opportunity for the local workers. In fact, similar reforms attempted during Trump's first terms were blocked legally, and this time, the administration appears to be building more structured case through public consultation and labor market argument. Even American companies are nervous. Industry estimates suggest that the new wage rule could cost employer an additional $18 billion in the first year alone, with annual costs potentially rising towards $43 billion as existing H-1B visas come up for renewal under the new salary standards. So tonight, thousands of Indian students and professionals are asking one difficult question. Is America still the land of opportunities for the foreign talent, or is the door slowly becoming narrower and narrower? Now, to a story that has deeply unsettled the Indian-American technology community in the world. 2 Indian origin men in California have pleaded guilty in a major H-1B fraud conspiracy case involving fake job positions and alleged misuse of university credibility. According to the US investigator Sampath Rajadi, he operated visa servicing companies called S-Team Software and Uptrend Technologies. Prosecutors here allege that between 2020 and 2023, Rajati and Sridhar Mada conspired to submit fraudulent H-1B petition claiming that foreign workers would work on projects connected to the University of California system. In fact, Mada reportedly worked as a chief information officer at the University of California Agriculture and Natural Resource Division. Authorities allege that the job positions described in the visa application, it did not actually exist. But the most important part of this story is not just the fraud itself, it is the political timing. Now, the scandal, it comes at a moment when immigration debate in America are already becoming highly charged. Every fraud case strengthens the argument from the critics who say that H-1B system is vulnerable to abuse. And here is why that matters. For most Americans, immigration policy is shaped less by statistics and more by headlines. One major fraud case can influence public perception far more than thousands of honest workers quietly doing their job successfully. Here, investigators claim the accused later marked these workers elsewhere after securing the visas, giving them an unfair advantage over competing firms in the limited H-1B lottery system. And now, multiple federal agencies are involved in the investigation, including Homeland Security Investigations, USCIS fraud units, and Treasury authorities. Both men face possible prison sentences along with major fines. But beyond the courtroom, this particular case reveals a much larger issue. America's immigration system increasingly operates under suspicion. And once trust begins weakening, stricter regulations almost always follow. So that means genuine Indian engineers, developers, and IT professionals may now face tougher scrutiny because of the actions of small number of people. And in today's political climate, perception can change policy very, very quickly. Now let's move on from fear to hope, because amid all the anxiety around immigration, layoff, and visas, one Indian origin businessman reminded the entire America what generosity can look like. At the graduation ceremony at North Carolina State University's Wilson College of Textiles, students expected what? Speeches, applause, celebration. But what they did not expect was financial freedom. Indian-American philanthropist Mr. Anil Kochar, he suddenly announced that he would pay off the final year students' loan of 176 graduates of 2025-26 academic year. In fact, the reaction inside that hall, that was emotional chaos. Cheers erupted. Students cried openly. Some covered their faces in disbelief. Because in America, student debt, it's not just a financial issue. It shapes the entire lives. Millions of young Americans delay buying homes, starting families, or launching businesses because of education loan. Student debt in the US, it has crossed trillions of dollars nationally. So for many graduates, debt becomes the first major burden of adulthood. And that is why Mr. Kochar's announcement, it resonated so deeply. And the story becomes even more emotional when you understand the history behind it. Mr. Kochar dedicated the gift to his father, Prakash Chand Kochar, who came from Punjab to study at the same institution in 1946. Can you think about the symbolism here? One immigrant generation arrived searching for opportunities. Decade later, the next generation became successful enough to remove financial burden for hundreds of American students. Well, ladies and gentlemen, proudly saying this is the side of Indian diaspora that often gets ignored during political immigration debates. Indian origin communities, they are now deeply embedded into American success story. Not just in technology though, but in medicine, academia, and business leadership. And in a time when immigrants are increasingly discussed through the language of restrictions and suspicion, moments like this reshape public perception, and that too very powerfully, because generosity speaks louder than politics. Now, sometimes one sentence can reopen centuries of history, right? Let's move on to our next story. And talking about Trinidad. This is exactly what happened when Prime Minister of Trinidad, Kamala Prasad Basesa, stood before the crowd during the Indian External Affairs Minister, Mr. S. Jaishankar's visit, and she proudly declared, "I am proud that today a small coolie girl has become the Prime Minister of Trinidad." Well, the statement exploded globally because the word coolie, it carries painful colonial history. It was historically used in very derogatory word for laborers that were brought from India to plantation across the Caribbean, Fiji, Mauritius, and other colonies after slavery was abolished. Now, for many Indians transported under Gimitya labor system faced terrible conditions. Long contracts, harsh labor, racism. In fact, they faced poverty, cultural isolation. Some did not even fully understand the agreements that they signed because they could not read English. Yet, despite all of the struggle, Indian communities preserved the language, religion, music, and traditions across generations. In fact, Ramayana reading, Indian festivals, Bhojpuri influences, and Hindu traditions survive thousands of kilometers away from India. And that is why Trinidad's Kamala Prasad Basesa's speech resonated emotionally. She was not apologizing for her roots. She was reclaiming them very proudly. And there is another powerful reality here. Nearly 45% of Trinidad and Tobago's population today is of Indian origin. Indo-Trinidadians now play a major role in politics, business, and public life. In fact, the Prime Minister even announced plans to rename Nelson Island, a historic immigration site connected to the Indian indentured laborer, in honor of Indian ancestors after public consultation. In fact, her speech, it reminded the entire world that the Indian diaspora story, it is not just about Silicon Valley, engineers, or global CEOs. It is also a story of survival after colonial displacement. A story of people once treated as laborers, whose descendants now lead the nation. Now, talking about the layoff bloodbath in America today, the story is terrifying. The workers, and that too across the United States. Well, you will agree, artificial intelligence is no longer a futuristic idea. It is already reconstructing the global workforce in real time. In just the first 10 days of May 2026, nearly 38,000 layoffs were announced across America. And what is alarming experts is not the numbers of jobs that are disappearing, but the sectors that are being affected. Technology, finance, aviation, cybersecurity, telecom, software. Well, these were once considered stable, high-paying, white-collar industries. In fact, Spirit Airlines collapsed entirely, alienating about 14,000 jobs after financial failure. In the meantime, Cantrell reported cuts of about 10,000 roles during reconstructing. PayPal removed thousands of workers during AI-driven operational changes. In fact, Cloudflare laid off about 20% of its workforce despite reporting strong revenue growth. Coinbase, Freshworks, and other tech companies announced major cuts too. So this reveals something historically important. Ladies and gentlemen, for decades, automation mainly threatened the factory workers. Machines replaced physical labors. But now AI is targeting cognitive labor. That means analysts, programmers, in fact, consumer support team, operational manager, and administrative workers. And Indians are particularly exposed because Indian professionals dominate many of these industries, and that too globally. IT service, outsourcing, in fact, back office operations and software support, they are precisely the sectors now being reshaped by automation. Even more disturbing is the language that companies are using, by the way. Executives increasingly describe reconstructing as AI-first transformation, operations efficiency, or agentic AI transition. Well, behind those phrases lies a brutal reality. Hundreds, maybe thousands of humans that were needed, not anymore. And unlike earlier recession, many of these companies are still profitable. They are not firing workers because they are collapsing. They are firing the workers because technology now allows them to operate with smaller teams. Well, this could become one of the biggest labor transformations since the Industrial Revolution, by the way. Well, with that, here's a question. Is AI turning into a global war on workers? Now, ladies and gentlemen, the debate is becoming much deeper than economics. It is becoming political, it is becoming philosophical, it is becoming more moral. Critics increasingly argue that artificial intelligence is being used not simply to improve productivity now, but to radically shift power towards cooperation. Can you think carefully about the irony of this moment? Employees spend years generating data, workflows, and institutional knowledge. AI systems learn from that particular ecosystem. Then companies use those same AI systems to eliminate the portion of the workforce. In fact, Cloudflare's CEO defended major layoffs by arguing that companies must become fitter in the AI era. Now that language, it really matters because it reveals a larger transformation in corporate thinking. Efficiency is becoming more important than employment stability here, and this fear, it is spreading globally. Labor experts worry that AI may create enormous wealth concentration while simultaneously weakening the middle-class job security. In fact, in previous industrial revolution, new technologies eventually created new industries and employment sector. But some economists, they now fear that AI may behave very differently because it can automate not only the manual work but also decision-making, communication, analytical tasks. Ladies and gentlemen, this debate is becoming extremely intense. Will AI create more opportunities than destruction? Or are we entering a period where millions of white-collar workers gradually become economically replaceable? And this is why governments everywhere, including India, are now watching America's labor market very closely, because what happens in Silicon Valley today, it often spreads globally tomorrow. Now coming back to Indian diaspora, let's talk about the story that is showing how immigration enforcement in America is entering a new phase entirely. Ladies and gentlemen, the US government is now trying to revoke the citizenship of Indian origin man. His name is Devashish Ghosh over allegations that are connected to $2.5 million fraud case. According to the Department of Justice, Ghosh allegedly conspired to defraud investors linked to the construction of an aircraft maintenance facility before becoming a naturalized American citizen. Here, authorities claim that during his 2012 naturalization process, he kind of falsely stated that he had never committed any crime for which he had been arrested. Now, prosecutors argue that his citizenship itself was obtained through concealment and misrepresentation. Wait, this is a very serious legal escalation, by the way, because denaturalization cases, they are historically rare in America. Citizenship has traditionally been viewed as one of the most secure legal status once granted. But if we see it politically, the atmosphere, it has completely changed after Mr. Trump. Mr. Trump era's immigration enforcement increasingly focuses not only on illegal border crossing but also on visa fraud, citizenship review, and retroactive scrutiny of immigration histories. In fact, Acting Attorney General Todd, he framed these actions as correcting the violation of immigration system. That language, it reveals something important here. Immigration enforcement is becoming more aggressive, more symbolic, and more politically visible here. Now, for many immigrant communities, this creates a new type of anxiety. While the idea that even citizenship record can later face review changes the whole perception of permanency and citizenship. And once again, public trust becomes central. The government argues that such cases protect the integrity of the immigration system. Now here, critics worry about growing fear and politicization. Either way, the message from Washington, that is unmistakable, scrutiny is now definitely intensifying. And finally tonight, one of the strangest and most fascinating stories unfolding in America today. After years of secrecy, the Pentagon has started releasing fresh files related to UFOs, or also we can call it UAPs. And suddenly, America is once again obsessed with what may exist in the skies. Ladies and gentlemen, the US Department of Defense says previous administrations often discouraged public discussion around unexplained aerial incidents. But under what the administration calls maximum transparency approach, agencies like NASA, the FBI, and the Department of Energy and Intelligence offices, they are now participating in releasing new material. And immediately, social media exploded. Alien theory, secret military programs, hidden technologies, government cover-ups, every theory imaginable returns to the mainstream internet. But experts, they are flipping. They are arguing question here. Analysts say that many UAP incidents, they may involve misunderstood military system, radar distortion, or advanced classified aircraft rather than any other life that exists. Earlier, Pentagon review also rejected all the claims that the US government had recovered an alien airspace. So, still, the fascination remains very powerful here, and perhaps the fascination tells us something about modern society itself. People are living through an era of enormous uncertainty. Wars, AI disruption, economic instability, political polarization, and rapid technological change. In uncertain times, mysterious stories gain a kind of emotional power because they reflect a deeper feeling that the world itself is becoming harder to understand. And that may be why this UFO debate, it suddenly feels bigger than entertainment. It feels symbolic of a world where every reality itself seems increasingly unpredictable. So that's a wrap up of our tonight's 8th story. They all may look very different on surface. Immigration, layoff, fraud, in fact, identity, politics, UFO files, but underneath, they are all connected to one deeper reality. America is changing rapidly, economically, politically, technologically, socially. For Indians abroad, this transformation brings both opportunity and risk. More influence, more success, but also more scrutiny, more competition, and more uncertainty. The old version of American dream, it is evolving into something far more unpredictable now. And perhaps that is the biggest story of all. This is Skyline. I am Driti Atri, and I'll see you in the next one.